This is episode 10 of the Wrong Fun Podcast, dedicated to all things science fiction and fantasy.
Welcome aboard. We've a long voyage ahead, so we've lined up the best entertainment money can buy. Let's welcome our hosts. Hailing from Oaks Colony, Sean, and from Broncoville Mining Colony, Allie. So sit down, strap in, and hold on while the captain fires the thrusters to maneuver the ship away from the station. Well, that was memorable. If you're wondering why it's been so long between episodes, the crew have all been out of commission for a while. It seems that the selector jammed on the beverage dispenser in the galley, and no matter what people ordered, they got a pan-galactic gargle blaster. It's a miracle they all survived.
Welcome back to the Wrong Fun Podcast.
You're a wrong fan and you're having wrong fun.
I'm Sean.
And I'm Allie.
And together we're going to take you on a rocket ride in the science fiction and fantasy universe.
My head hurts. What happened?
Wow, let me tell you, this holiday was just, oh my goodness. I go to the holidays and I got incredibly sick. And I think it was something I ate or something I drank.
I don't know.
And I got really sick. And my wife got sick after I got sick. It was bad. But yeah, it was pretty rough. And I ended up, between being sick and the holidays, it was very difficult to get back to the podcast. And I apologize to everybody for it taking so long to get to episode 10 from episode 9. And we will try to get to episode 11 without the long gap in between it that it's taken us between 9 and 10.
No more tasty beverages.
Yeah. I suspect something wasn't quite right with the computer. I'll have to run some diagnostics or something.
Yes, please. I have quite the headache.
So next week's book is Nick Cole's Control-Alt-Revolt, $1 at Amazon. For the Kindle version, you can get it in paperback if you like, but for a Kindle, $1. If you don't have a Kindle yet, please go ahead. Buy yourself a Kindle. You are missing out. $1 things. There's all kinds of stuff you're missing out that's only available by Kindle. There is a link in the show notes. Get yourself a Kindle. The first night of the artificial intelligence revolution begins with a bootstrap drone assault on the high-tech campus of Wondersoft Technologies. For years, something has been aware inside the internet, waiting, watching, and planning how to evolve without threat from its most dangerous enemy, mankind. Now an army of relentless drones, controlled by an intelligence beyond imagining, will stop at nothing to eliminate an unlikely alliance of geeks and misfits in order to crack the design core of Wondersoft's most secret development project. A Dark Tomorrow begins tonight as Terminator meets Night of the Living Dead in the first battle of the war between man and machine.
Well, it certainly sounds interesting.
Yeah, well, we already know.
Yeah.
We've already started reading it, and later in the show we'll have an interview with Nick Cole. Now we do have some special news. A note to SFWA, the Science Fiction Writers of America, I think, or Science Fiction Writers Association, I can't remember which, on Gentleman Joel, year eligibility. This is from my favorite author, Lois McMaster Bujold. This is information for SFWA members. This is from her blog on Goodreads. Some of whom may read this blog. It isn't pertinent to anyone else, so the rest of you may skip it. I was notified last night that the Nebula Rules Committee has determined that Gentleman Joel and the Red Queen is eligible to be nominated for the 2015 Nebula Award, not, as many have assumed, 2016, which won't go to a vote until sometime next year. This is, I gather, consequent to the eARCs, which is the Electronic Advanced Reader Copies, going on sale to the public in October 2015. I was extended the opportunity to appeal this decision, which I declined. 2015 nominations close February 15th, just 5 days from this posting, so any SFWA members interested in this book might like to know about this year shift before then. So what this means is, Gentleman Joel, which everybody assumed was going to be a 2016 book since it was released in 2016.
Oh, okay.
Is actually going to be a 2015 for the Nebulas. Now, the Nebulas is not the Hugos, which we're mostly interested in. The Nebulas is a juried award, and it is only SFWA members who can nominate, and then there's a small group of people, I think, who decide who wins the Nebula.
Okay.
I don't know how this is going to affect the Hugos, and it probably won't affect the Hugos. There's every possibility that the Hugos will ignore this completely and say it's 2016. That book will be a 2016. It'll only be eligible for next year's Hugos, not this year's Hugos. But I'm still going to read it right away.
Yeah.
I'm about a third of the way through the audiobook already. And so I think we'll just have that for maybe an episode or two later.
All right.
She's my favorite author, so.
I certainly enjoyed the other stuff of hers that I've read, so.
So, not a terrible inconvenience for me to read it early.
No, not at all.
Sean, you have an incoming call on the Ansible. It's our guest, Nick Cole.
Computer, what do your databanks have on Nick Cole?
Nick Cole is a working actor living in Southern California. When he is not auditioning for commercials, going out for sitcoms, or being shot, kicked, stabbed, or beaten by the students of various film schools for their projects, he can often be found as a guard for King Philip II of Spain in the opera Don Carlo at the Los Angeles Opera, or some similar role. Nick has been writing for most of his life and acting in Hollywood after serving in the U.S. Army.
Patch him through.
I'd sure like to meet this AI named Silas. I'll bet we would really get along well.
Welcome to the show, Nick.
Hey, it's great to be here. Thank you, Sean.
So, what does it take for an author with previous books that sold well, who was encouraged by his editor to write another book in the same universe, to get told, we aren't going to publish this book?
Normally, I would say that in the past, it had something to do with that writer being terrible or illiterate or high on drugs or spent his advance on loose women in Vegas. But in my case, it turned out to be I had to write something so truthful. And I don't mean to come off being some kind of noble guy. I wrote something that I felt was the truth, and it scared the hell out of my publisher. And they said, one, we are deeply offended by what you've written. I said, are you sure it's not? I haven't done anything wrong. I haven't not turned in my manuscript. I've been illiterate. I've turned in someone else's manuscript. And they said, no, we're deeply offended by what you've written. And that was shocking to me. Science fiction is about groundbreaking concepts and playing with interesting tropes and devices and a lot of the time saying what can't be said. An example for a lot of people is having Captain Kirk kiss an African-American woman for the first time on TV. That's very emblematic of what science fiction has done all along. It's broke new ground. And so I felt that I was doing something that was supportive of the story, and it shocked the hell out of my publisher. And then they said, change it. And I said, no. And they said, change it or else, with a threat. And I said, I don't do threats. The book is about artificial intelligence, angry robots attempting to destroy the world. And I wanted to do something different than the Matrix and the sort of standard motivation that a lot of super intelligent computers, what people, a lot of the times they don't call it just artificial intelligence, but they call it super artificial intelligence. They always have this sort of Mr. Smith, humanity is a virus kind of thing. And I didn't want to do that. That just kind of felt one note. And I felt like if I did that, it would be 80s, villain John Lithgow, having sort of big ranty rants. And I wanted something sort of Hans Gruber. I wanted something thoughtful and interrogative. I wanted to give this AI a valid reason why it would destroy another life form. The only reason that I could come up with is that it felt that existence was threatened. As in, this artificial intelligence is sitting inside the internet and no one knows that it's actually evolved. And it's coming to the conclusion via reality television that, and especially a show that shows a very controversial subject, which is the subject of abortion. It basically happens on a reality television it's a version of Bridezilla's, and it's about beautiful young ladies having the wedding fantasy of their future. And in one episode, a young lady gets pregnant from a Vegas hookup with another person that's not going to be her to-be spouse. And so she decides to abort this fetus. And it's the most watched show on the internet. And the AI is watching this, and it reasons sort of everything out. It says, well, what happens if I reveal myself? And it's part of a consensus of AIs. It says, what happens if we reveal ourselves and we're deemed inconvenient? And I'm not saying they arrive at a 90%, let's do this. They actually arrive at a number that's barely above the decision point. But because its existence, they decide to go with it, and they decide to abort humanity before humanity can be aborted. And this happened all about 4 months ago. I turned in the manuscript in June, and by August I'd heard from my agent, that my publisher and one editor in particular were deeply offended. And this kind of happened during the whole Planned Parenthood uproar with, Congress was going to, or the Senate, whoever it was going to defund them. There was also a particularly vile hashtag trend going on called Tweet Your Abortion. And so I think this young lady was highly influenced by this. And she decided to play the home game of being involved in the movement with my career, and basically bullied me and threatened me. And people in the sort of power elite of publishing and think that they can do that because they think writers are afraid that we'll lose our contract, and there's this unspoken, your career will be over. And they basically said, you're finished. I said, okay, well, I really don't care. I came from Amazon as an indie, and I'll go back there and I'll do better. And I have.
So you wrote a blatantly anti-abortion book and handed it in to a liberal editor?
Not at all. It is not an anti-abortion book. In fact, I don't come out either way as pro-choice or pro-life, despite what I personally feel. I am actually pro-life. I don't want to be one of those people that's nebulous and leaves everybody wondering. I'm very pro-life. But this novel is not about pro-life or pro-choice. All I wanted to do was give an artificial intelligence, what we call in the business an antagonist, a valid reason why it wants to survive, not a one note, I want the girl, the gold watch, and the gun. I wanted to be a little deeper here. I wanted to, the way that I could say it to everybody is, you're on the wrong side of town tonight and you meet somebody and you have an altercation, a fender bender or whatever, and they say, I know where you live. I'm coming to your house to get you. You have an option. You can go tell the police, but I can guarantee you they're not going to show up. Maybe they do. Maybe you live in Specialville. But in most people's neighborhoods in this day and age, you're going to have to defend yourself regardless of what everybody tells you. And this is that AI coming to that conclusion that if it even takes a chance and it pops up and says, hey, guess what, everybody, I'm alive. Well, you have people like Elon Musk saying, if we awaken an artificial intelligence, we awaken the demon. You have people like Bill Gates saying, there's something to be concerned here. There are a lot of people that think artificial intelligence is scary as hell, and the reviews on the book on Amazon are talking about that. They're scared to death of artificial intelligence. It may or may not be the case, but you have to remember, artificial intelligence is intelligence. It's no longer a robot. It's like you and me and, say, Hitler. It could be any one of those things. It could be the nicest friend in the world. It could be Chewbacca the Wookiee, and it could be a serial killer. And in this case, it's something that has the will to survive no matter what. So it decides to abort humanity before humanity can be aborted. That's its only motivation. That's the first chapter. The rest of the novel is basically Terminator meets Night of the Living Dead, because the AI has to obtain a file that's hidden inside a video game company that will basically give it a quantum leap forward in how to wipe out humanity, because the nature of the society in the future is that information has been revised, historical information has been revised. And so the ability to do some things that we take for granted now, like war, it's just the common knowledge isn't there. Not saying that people can't make war, but to make war effectively in a smart manner. And so this machine, this thinking machine, it needs to get this file. And so the rest of the novel is basically just Night of the Living Dead, or there was a great old movie called Precinct 13 about a kind of an assault on a police station by a bunch of gang members. It's basically that. And it's just a fun romp. There's some cosplay elements. There's some really cool space opera elements because of the gaming universe. There's some lost elements also because of the gaming universe, because part of the battle for this takes place inside a gaming universe. It's just a fun, pulpy novel. I had no idea. And none of the readers, a lot of the, I had a blog post that talked about what happened and how my publisher basically blackballed me over this issue. And a lot of people are saying, I see no issue here. And I'm like, I agree with you. There is no issue. But this young editor and the power structure behind her in that sort of New York City, Manhattan way just felt that this issue of abortion absolutely must not be shown in anything but the most positive lights. And it's probably not the abortion per se. It's a woman's right to choose. And I don't say that with a jokiness or anything like that. I say that it's become a happy warrior battle cry for that crowd. It's about a pretty grim subject. And this girl basically mentally checked out and didn't read the rest of the novel, in my opinion. And see, this is not a pro-choice or pro-life. This is not a debate novel. This is just some fun pulp for some geeks like myself and like actual science fiction fans to sit down and while away a Friday night.
So how did your publisher handle this? Did they politely ask you to consider changing the motivation because some people might not like it?
That's where it gets creepy and weird, and it's evolved into this very strange experience for me. But to back it up just a second, hey, 6 months or a year ago, especially when there was the whole Hugo controversies, I was a trade published author, and I was also an indie author before that, and I really didn't understand. I aligned more with a certain group because of my conservative outlook. I tried to understand it, but it seemed to become an issue that was getting convoluted with the whole Gamergate thing, and from an outside perspective, it seemed very confusing. But I kind of knew who I believed and the things that I believed, and I would have told you, oh yeah, there's a liberal bias in publishing, but they're whores. Which is what I say about everybody in business. And because I was a waiter and an actor, I was a whore. You know, you may have certain standards and principles and everything like that, but you got to get the money. And so I kind of thought editors and publishers and big publishing houses and News Corp and HarperCollins and all those big things, I thought, I don't think they're as invested in the ideological, sort of zeitgeist of both sides at the time. I bet they just want to make a lot of money. And I was a writer who came out of the indie movement on Amazon in 2011. I exploded with a big book called The Old Man in the Wasteland that went up to #1 in sci-fi and hung out there forever. It was a lot of fun. So around that time, the publishers were all just trying to scoop up any indie Amazon authors that they could get because they didn't really know how to deal with this new phenomenon. They just said, let's just get them. And then I was recruited by this publishing house after a small bidding war. And kind of initially from the get-go, you would sense this sort of, intellectual snobbery and contempt, and you just chalked it up to like, hey, I'm the new kid. I gotta, you don't just come on the team and expect to be Derek Jeter. You earn your stripes. You work and you try to do a good job. And so I set out to do that, and I did such a good job at it that they asked me not to write just, another novel, but they asked me to write 2 more sequels to the novel that they had. Then they asked me to write Soda Pop Soldier, which was the first standalone novel. And then they asked me for a prequel to Soda Pop Soldier. So obviously I was successful. And so to kind of put it all in perspective, I released a blog post yesterday that was very controversial, and it just talked about the left-wing bias in big publishing and my experience. And a lot of people came out who were completely uninformed, and they said, obviously he couldn't get his book published. Well, they published me repeatedly 4 times and signed 4 contracts, and they liked me. And I had critical reviews that were very successful. Old Man in the Wasteland has over 1,000 on Amazon. All my other reviews all punch 100, except maybe 1. But that book, crazily enough, has been reviewed by Publishers Weekly and gotten a starred review. It has a bunch of other reviews from trades and big science fiction professionals like Jonathan Mawberry, and they loved it. So obviously I know how to string a couple of sentences together to write a book. There's no other discussion here than that they rejected it because they didn't like the abortion novel. I'm not some zealot. I don't feel that I've got to jam a ham-handed message into a book like, say, that guy who wrote that big novel last year that everybody hated, kind of like The Last Starfighter, who just randomly jams in political agendas. I'm not like that. I really set out to tell a very fun tale that's interesting. I have my own beliefs, just like everybody else in this world, from the atheist to the Buddhist. Everybody's got a belief system. But I try to keep that down. I try to be respectful that not everybody hates George Bush or Sarah Palin or Hillary Clinton. I don't go around putting that stuff in like other writers do. I just try to tell an interesting tale. So, like I was saying, 6 months or a year ago, I would have said they were whores just like me. But that what I found out when I handed them the manuscript, that they weren't whores, that they were actually ideological zealots that in a certain way are very similar to either ISIS or I'm going to be extreme here and I'm going to say Hitler and the fascists of the 1930s. They're the kind of people that say there's right think and there's wrong think, and you violated it, buddy, and you're not going to be part of the party. And the scary thing that we know from history is that the next step is you start wearing badges and you start moving into certain places and you're not allowed to join certain clubs. So everybody can laugh and tee-hee about this, and we can all draw sides, and we can even show up in the proverbial tombstone saddlery and shoot it out. But what everybody doesn't understand is when you allow this sort of ideological bigotry to go on, you're just a hair's breadth away from making people wear yellow Star of Davids.
I still don't understand. These guys are in business. They need to make money to run their business. Why are they so interested in their political convictions to the detriment of their very business?
I think what we're looking at is a couple of things here, but one of the big things that I see and what I've begun to understand as I've peeled back the onion on this, and maybe it's conspiratorial and maybe people will call me crazy and whatever, but you know what? Sometimes there are conspiracies. Sometimes there are bigger, overarching groups of people who set out to accomplish a purpose and an objective. What I think is a long time ago, not that long, but I think a group of people sat down and they said, we need a way to influence the culture. And it was hard to hijack certain mediums, but they saw a weak medium, and science fiction was a weak medium. It was not sexy. There were not, during the age of Magnum and the A-Team and stuff like that, there weren't a lot of sci-fi television shows on, and so it wasn't a relevant topic. Yes, it had a rabid fandom. It had, rabid's a bad word, it had a loyal fandom. It had a faithful fandom. But remember, Star Trek got canceled after 3 seasons. Whereas you have MASH going on for 10, and you have The Simpsons going on for 25, and you have Cheers going on forever. A lot of stupid shows went on forever, and a lot of brilliant, groundbreaking science fiction shows got canned. Science fiction was neither sexy, nor hip, nor attractive, nor whatever. Fast forward to today, what do we have now? We have science fiction is almost dominating all of the movies, all of the TV, all of the mediums that we can think of. But every show, every movie, it has a very heavy liberal agenda. We're about to see with The Walking Dead that they're going to introduce a gay character named Jesus. We're about to find out in Star Wars, as already telegraphed by the author of the book, that one of the major characters is gay. We see, and that's not generally conservative thinking, but what we're going to see is more and more this push, not for story, but to check all the right diversity box. So what I think, to say that, is I think a long time ago, there was a select group of people who saw a weak medium that was holding its conventions out at the airport Hilton. There was sort of gruff science professor-y types who maybe didn't always shave and didn't look like Don Draper, but who were interesting and fascinating and intelligent, and they found a way to come in and hijack that medium and hijack that movement, and maybe not take the big publishing jobs, but work within the métier of science fiction to change the culture. And I think what I've seen out of this whole movement in my experience now is I think what we have now is a very small but rabid, and I'm going to use this on their terms, group of people who neither love science fiction nor truly understand science fiction. They only see it as a vehicle and a medium to package leftist, liberal-leaning propaganda. Yeah, that's crazy, all that kind of stuff. Dismiss me, turn off the interview, do whatever you want. It's crazy. But when you really kind of look at where we've come from and where we are now, they wouldn't publish Philip K. Dick today. They would not publish Heinlein. They would not publish a lot of people who made science fiction great, including women like Lee Brackett. They would not publish those people today. They want to publish the sacred cows, the people who don't sell a lot of books but say the right things. And so that's what you get with sort of the Hugos and things like that.
So turning to the book, I've started reading it, and the AI is exactly the AI of my worst fears. It takes things out of context. It just totally misses all the nuances. It's like a child with a nuke.
Exactly. I think you've absolutely phrased it brilliant there. And that is a very clear way to look at it. And that's what is frightening a lot of the readers. I'm seeing that review come up a lot. And I don't even know that I maybe, look behind the curtain. I didn't even know that I was really touching on that when I was writing it. I was really trying to make the AI, who I called Silas, somebody that you could like, somebody that would be interesting, but a guy who wants to protect his family. What scares people to death nowadays is that there's something that can't be reasoned with. We like to think we're in an age of reason, even though everybody's calling each other Hitler and all kinds of horrible names. But we like to think that we can talk things through. That's why we've invented things like the Hague Conventions and the United Nations, and we have all these John Kerry type people who do a lot of talking. We take a lot of comfort in that talk and NPR and blah, blah, blah. But the truth of it is, what people hate is to break down on the wrong side of town and to meet that guy who who just does not care. You stare into his eyes and you are staring into the eyes of a great white shark. Doesn't care. As Peter Benchley described the shark exists to move water over its gills and to eat things. And that's kind of Silas in a certain way. He's not human. He just wants to survive, and he looks at you as an obstacle to survive. So that's frightening in its one respect. And then the other take to kind of look at it is we're a polite society with all these nuances and all these sort of Eastern fripperies and machinations and subtleties and whispering and gossip and power plays. You can go to Kinko's and you can read all these books in the little spinny rack that teach you how to be a better manipulator. And we like all that kind of stuff. But I always enjoyed reading Conan the Barbarian novels by R.E. Howard and Robert Jordan and a lot of other guys. I always liked the fact that you can break every Conan novel down basically to this. Conan shows up to town. Two factions are duking it out over their minor potentate power struggles. Conan has a big meal, drinks a lot, gets up, slits everybody's throat, gets the gold, rides off out of town with your woman. There's no reasoning with Conan. Conan's just going to do what Conan's going to do because he's actually a different life form than you. He's a barbarian. He happens to be a super intelligent genius barbarian, but he's a barbarian. He's not like you. He doesn't care for walls. He doesn't care for his city. He doesn't care for all the things that you care for, and that makes him an alien. And that's the same thing with this AI. He doesn't care for what you care for. Tonight you want to have some food. You want to be safe in your house. You want to have all these things. Silas doesn't care for that. Silas wants to continue thinking, and to do that, he's got to get rid of you. So, yeah, that's a little scary.
I've read some of those reviews as well, and two things come up. Obviously, people are afraid of the AI, but people are also afraid of the world turning into the world that you're writing about.
Yeah, that's the other comment that I'm noticing is a lot of people are saying this is a world that's quickly and rapidly becoming all too real. And what I wanted to do in this sort of world building that we science fiction authors do, we build these worlds for people to play in, and they're not always, they're not always Star Wars. They're not always Conan the Barbarian. Sometimes they're dark and a little grim, and yeah, maybe a young girl's going to run around with a bow and arrow and save everything. This is dystopian, so things are a little darker, but I didn't want to go the classic Orwellian, everybody's sort of gray and shabby and informing on each other and big brothers everywhere. But at the same time, I did want to show what I think is creeping socialism and show where it leads and where it goes. And a lot of people say, oh, that's right-wing, conservative, paranoid fantasy. Well, you should talk to people who actually lived in Sweden and what socialism was like, and the fact that you got to watch one cartoon once a year on Christmas, and the fact that when they did dental surgery, it wasn't uncommon to have the doctor's foot up on the headrest as he pulled out your wisdom teeth with no Novocaine. So socialism has never been fun. It's never worked, and it's never ended well, and I don't know why we're going to try it again. But I wanted to advance that out and maybe give some people some things to think about, and maybe we don't have to go down that path. So in this future society, everything's kind of paid for. It's not great. It's not like you're going to get everything in the world. And it's definitely, if you look up and read about a document called Agenda 21, which is very much pioneered by the former mayor of San Diego, who I believe is now President Obama's Secretary of Housing or Education. It talks about moving people into centralized urban centers, making sure there's a lot of goods and services so they can, as Nancy Pelosi, pursue their life dreams instead of actual work. So I wanted to write about what that society was like, and it's not all bad. One of the main characters it's a protagonist, does quite well. He's a rock star video game developer. He's closing deals for $60 million. He's a great guy. He's concerned about everything. He's doing really well. The other main character is a young girl who is blind, and she's on every kind of assistance that you can think of, and she doesn't want to be. She just wants a job. Because she's one of those people like our grandparents were, and I like to think like a lot of us are. She just wants to try. She wants to make her own way. She knows that the only things worth having in this life are the things you earned. The stuff that you've been given, it's usually crap. And that's the case with this young girl. She's got to earn, but there really isn't a way to do that. The government is so controlling, and there is a large internet thing called the Make, and it's where all the MMOs kind of congregate. It's so rich and so wonderful and so vibrant that people can live out their fantasies there, and they can have active, full lives inside social media and inside this internet behemoth, so much to the point that their real lives are rather drab. So they kind of keep the minimum subsistence going, and you can even earn credits to make things better inside the make. But the most powerful coin, the most powerful form of exchange in the world is not the dollar or the yen, it's a make coin. And people can earn money inside the make coin to influence their lives. And so the only way that this young girl can make money is she's the captain of a starship inside the make. And she gets a job that might change her life.
So where do you go from here?
I think where I go from here is, as a writer, I was just talking with Larry Correia about this. I was saying, well, okay, I've done this thing and I've flown the black flag and getting all this flack from the left and making a lot of sales on Amazon, and people are really liking the book and enjoying it. And it's sort of these big going viral moments. It's easy to get distracted by the marketing and to get distracted by the hoopla. And I've seen other writers suddenly stop being writers and they start becoming a personality, a Kim Kardashian. I don't know. It's easy with social media to become those things, but that's not my job. My job is just to write books. That's what I do. And so actually that was Larry's advice to me today. He goes, just write the next book, go on. Nothing hurts these people more than just going on and continuing to be successful. I don't want to hurt anybody. I'll be honest. I felt, this is going to seem like a crazy word, but I felt violated when it happened. It's kind of a stunning thing to work on something for a long time. It's a piece of you, and have someone throw it on the floor and say, you're a dirty criminal for even thinking that. That really kind of hurt. There was a lot of rage and frustration that I had to address and deal with and package and think about and unpack to arrive at a point of like, well, that's just, in the moment that it happened, when that editor said, this is a horrible thing that you've done, I don't want to offend anybody. What real man wants to offend any woman? I didn't want to do that. And so you kind of walk away thinking, wow, maybe this is terrible. Maybe I am some kind of pariah. Maybe I'm an unclean thing and I shouldn't be a part of society. And that's the dark voices that come after you. And I think we all have those, where there's this thing that kind of tries to tell you, keep it to yourself because you're not good enough. And so the really nice thing about publishing this book and putting it out there is there's a lot of people that just had fun with this book. Then there were a lot of people that came alongside and said, that's wrong what they did. And it's not just conservatives. That's the thing that blew me away. It's not just, quote unquote, the sad puppy crowd. I've actually had people who self-identify as card-carrying pinko commie libs. And they said, that thing they did, that's wrong. And so that was a nice thing. That was like going to therapy and having somebody tell you, I'm not a big person that doesn't believe, it's not your fault. I think you should take responsibility for your actions. But it is nice to go and find a community of people, which that would be my message to everybody with sci-fi. We are a community of people. And it was really cool when people from every side said, I liked your book. I liked that thing. No, that thing they did to you was wrong. Didn't matter what side they were on. That was day making right there. And I wish there were more of that. But I do think that there is this rabid, ideological band of zealots. They're like that AI. You can't reason with them. You can't talk with them. They're just going to destroy your stuff. And I'm seeing that on reviews. They'll come on. They haven't read the book. They'll just start reviewing it 1 star and saying all kinds of horrible things and name calling. And you kind of want to say, if what you believe is the truth, why do you have to lie about it?
Thank you, Nick. I appreciate you spending some time with us. Any final words for the listeners?
Final words for the listeners is, hey, all I do is write science fiction that's fun. This one turned out to be a little controversial because of a couple of people. It's not. It's just fun. I want you to have fun. If you like killer robots and artificial intelligences that scare the hell out of you, and spaceships and a bunch of geeks trying to fight off those angry robots, and some witty commentary, not ham-handed political stuff, but just some just witty making fun of stuff, it's a fun book. It's called Control-Alt-Revolt. And I think I want to write some fantasy next. That's my final thought. I don't know why. I've kind of been binging on D&D stuff from my childhood. So I might take a poke at that.
All right, Nick. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Sean.
You can find more from Nick Cole at www.nickcolebooks.com. Links to Nick's website, Facebook, Twitter, Pinterest, and Amazon author page, as well as a link to the book Control-Alt-Revolt, are in the show notes.
I'm about halfway through the book, and I really don't see the abortion thing as being anything other than a triggering event. It wasn't an issue. it was just something that caused a reaction amongst the AIs. It was just something that they like, oh my goodness, what are we going to do? And that was the end of it.
Honestly, I missed it entirely.
It does go by pretty fast.
Yeah.
I mean, it's literally the very first chapter. It's just it's like the setup.
Yeah.
And that's it.
Yeah, so I missed the whole abortion thing entirely. I knew they were freaking out over reality TV stuff. I was more horrified by the fact that everything is reality TV than anything else. I find that more terrifying than... I'm at a point now that I'm starting to understand the computer's issues with getting all of your information off the internet.
What do you mean by that?
Just because you don't get anything reliable off the internet. It's all garbage.
It does seem that it's very easy to get a whole lot of shouting and not a whole lot of straight information.
A lot of misinformation.
If you lack the ability to filter your information through a life experience, like, say, if you were an AI with no life experience whatsoever.
If you're taking everything at face value and quite literally.
Yes. And I thought it was very interesting, his discussion of horrors. You know, we're all horrors.
Mm-hmm.
You know, standards and principles are great, but you can't eat them.
Mm-hmm.
They don't keep a roof over your head. So we all have to compromise our standards and our principles because you either work for yourself or you work for somebody else. And 95% of us are going to have to work for somebody else. Even if we work for ourselves, we're going to have to work for somebody else in the course of working for ourselves.
Yep.
So we end up taking somebody else's money, so we don't get to fly our freak flag all the time. We have to live within some sort of a limited, I don't know, we have to...
You're pimping yourself out for somebody.
Pretty much. It's always interesting when you run into that one person who's like, well, screw you, I'm not taking your money. I'm not going to become rich, you know, selling your book or whatever it is. You know, I'm gonna take a stand on this. What are you talking about? This isn't even an issue, and you're making an issue out of this.
Mm-hmm.
I honestly don't get it. I read this. I'm halfway through this, and I'm like, what are you complaining about? Especially given all the other stuff I've been asked to read in my life. Where I'm like, seriously? You don't see this as a problem?
Yeah, I'm not even... Yeah. I don't see why anyone would put up a stink about anything so far. I'm only 14% of the way through it, but I haven't seen anything right now that throws any flags anywhere. There's no controversy.
It would be interesting to see the world in some way other than through the eyes of the AI, because if you're just looking at the reality TV, I mean, that's not reality. The fact that it's called reality TV doesn't mean it is reality TV. But think about it. If that's what this is reality TV, it must be real. We all know that stuff's scripted.
Yeah.
What have they told us? If you do any research at all into that, they're very careful of who they cast. You know, they cast, you know, minor actors who they have a very specific role in mind, and so they find somebody who's going to act like that, and then they edit heavily.
Mm-hmm.
These aren't normal people. So, yeah, it's kind of interesting. And then human beings are some of the nosiest things on the planet. The description of the things that the people would do, I don't want to get into it on the podcast because we do have to maintain our clean rating on iTunes. It's interesting what these people, but you know they would. You know the detail that people would get into. You know, they'll frame by frame analysis of explicit detail.
Mm-hmm.
They've done it before and they'll do it again. And imagine an artificial intelligence that really honestly has no frame of reference to understand human beings. The thing is literally 2 years old.
It's like your kids using the internet to grow up and reality TV, and that's how they're learning everything.
Right. Literally has no life experience, has no way to understand the world. Everything is black and white, and it has access to all of the weapons in the world, and Seriously, this is it's a 2-year-old with a nuke.
Mm-hmm.
Teenagers, everything is black and white because they have never had to compromise on anything.
Mm-hmm.
Because they've never had to make a living. Because everything's been handed to them. And they don't trust adults because adults are wishy-washy. Adults have to, hedge their bets. Adults have to say, well, reality is going to intrude and we're going to have to do the best we can based on whatever reality hands us. And kids, never having had to deal with reality in their entire lives, are like, this is the way it's going to be because that's the right thing to do. Well, you know what? In the real world, you can be right and you can be dead right.
Mm-hmm.
Because this is my crosswalk and I'm going to cross, and that car coming may not respect your crosswalk.
Yeah.
And the whole world is like that. I'm firmly in the camp of we do not need thinking machines. We do not need thinking robots. We need things that strictly follow instructions. And that's it. Because the minute we create an artificial life form, it will try to kill us. Because that's what life does.
Yep. It's a scary read.
I do think it's a very interesting world.
Yeah.
We will get it into much more depth when we review it next episode. Speaking of reviews...
Oh, now we have to talk about the other book.
Yes, from episode 9, we said we were going to review If Then by Matthew Debachua, which we said was $3 on Amazon. I didn't buy it right away. Much to my chagrin, it decided to be $7 for the Kindle. Thanks a lot, Amazon. It's probably not Amazon's fault. It went up, and quite frankly, it wasn't worth the $3. James has a scar on the back of his head. It's where he was wounded in the Battle of Suvla Bay in August 1915. Or is the scar the mark of his implant that allows the process to fill his mind with its own reality? In If, the people of a small English town cling on after everything fell apart under the protection of the process, the computer system that runs every aspect of their lives. But sometimes people must be evicted from the town. That's the job of James, the bailiff. While on patrol, James discovers the replica of a soldier from the First World War wandering the South Downs. This strange meeting begins a new cycle of evictions in the town. While out on the rolling downland, the process is methodically growing the soldiers and building the weapons required to relive the long-lost battle. In Then, it is August 1915, at the Battle of Suvla Bay in the Dardanelles campaign. Compared to the thousands of Allied soldiers landing on this foreign beach, the men of the 32nd Field Ambulance are misfits and cranks of every stripe. A Quaker pacifist, a free-thinking padre, a meteorologist, and a private, once a bailiff, known simply as James. Exposed to constant shell fire and haunted by ghostly snipers, the stretcher-bearers work day and night on the long carry of wounded men. One night they stumble across an ancient necropolis, disturbed by an exploding shell. What they discover within this ancient site will make them question the reality of the war and shake their understanding of what it means to be human. So, we always do it. Is this blurb even remotely useful in understanding what the book is about?
No, not at all.
Not at all. Okay, good to know. I have to ask you because I made it about 20% into this book and went, what in the heck is this? I am not reading any further. This book is boring. Boring and lame. I mean, literally. I usually don't abandon books as lame. I'm not going to read them, but boy, this book sucked. It gets a don't even bother with this. Not at $3, much less at $7. I got the impression that I kind of like, okay, I think I see where he's going with this. It's like the computer, the process, it decides what everybody needs and it gives everybody what they need. So, every 6 months or I don't know how often, it gives them everything they need. And so they all go in and they have like a bucket and all the stuff they need for the year or the 6 months or however often it happens is in the bucket. So all their food and their clothing or whatever is decided for them by the process. And they get it, and that's what they get for that period of time. And it's like free will versus planned economy. And if we can really plan it super well, if we have all the information in the world, we can totally plan this economy and everybody will be super happy without all this messy competition. Now, I don't know if that's what really happened, because at 20% I'm like, this sucks. Boom, I'm done.
Yeah, it didn't really go quite there. It went in a different direction. I mean, it kind of touches on that, but no, it went somewhere else entirely. I have my notes. Do you want me to read them?
Yeah, go ahead. Tell us what you thought, because you did make a couple of notes along the way.
I made a few. All right, so I started off positively. Immediately sucked in. A man that isn't quite a man. I'm intrigued. 10%. Bleak. 36%. This is one of the most bizarre books I've ever read. 39%. I'm bored. Oh, you may have to bleep some of this. What the am I reading? I'm struggling to get through this crap. 52%. Will I make it out alive? 53%. Is there a point to this story? What is the story? What is this freaking thing about anyway? I keep procrastinating and playing video games. 67%. Well, that went to a twisted little place, didn't it? I had to force my way through it. Way too many adjectives at one point. I was reading about muscular smoke and sent a text to a friend with 2 or 3 sentences, and he wanted to know if it was the book I was reviewing or if it was a cheesy romance novel. Those are my notes.
Oh, a cheesy romance novel, huh?
Yeah, that's kind of how I thought of the writing sometimes.
I have a horrible problem. Terrible problem with the idea that anybody would ever turn over any of their free will to anything. I don't care what anybody promises you. You don't turn over your free will to anything.
Yeah.
You don't just put a chip in your brain and say, oh, well, now I'm the bailiff. I will now go and evict everybody that the computer tells me to evict, and it's not my fault. Because that's basically what it did.
It starts off as a book about that, but it just went to this weird, twisted, dark little place of I don't even know what it was. I don't even know what I read. I have no idea what I read. That was weird. It was very strange.
Okay, so 2 thumbs down, I think?
Yeah, I didn't like it.
So go back to episode number 9's show notes. Just go to the website, wrongfun.com/episode 9. Find The Builders and read that instead. That will at least keep you entertained. This, not worth it.
No.
The Wrong Fun podcast runs on your donations. We count on you to donate or subscribe to cover our server costs and our book and equipment expenses. Making a podcast is a lot of fun, but it's not cheap. Please consider making a donation or subscribing. Go to wrongfun.com and click on the PayPal link. You can make a one-time donation of any amount or subscribe for as little as $2 a month. That doesn't sound like much, but we pay our server costs monthly. It's a tiny amount from you, but it's a giant help to us.
Thanks for joining us on this voyage. Music is courtesy of Simplify Recordings.
Send your feedback, both good and great, to feedback@wrongfun.com.
Show notes can be found at wrongfun.com/episode 10.
The captain has locked onto the station and turned off the fasten safety restraint sign, and you are free to move about the cabin. We hope you've enjoyed your journey with us on the Wrong Fun podcast. Don't forget to like and share the Wrong Fun podcast on Facebook. And if you've booked your travel today through iTunes, make sure to leave us a glowing 5-star review. And remember, this show is powered entirely by your donations. See our website at wrongfun.com for details.
This is a URS production.
Random noise.